Good morning. I'm Emily. I'm the Children and Youth Coordinator here at All Saints, and I'm going to tell a story based on the Gospel of Matthew. And this story has the greatest commandment of all. But it comes with a little bit of extra information too, than just the greatest commandment. But I think today, in 2020, in the middle of an election season, in the middle of a global pandemic, the greatest commandment gives us new insight on how to do it. So today we hear this story from Matthew where Jesus is met by a group of people that talk about a lot about laws and rules that they have to follow, and there's lots and lots of people around. And one person who is a part of the Pharisees and is known for asking a lot of tough questions and possibly getting Jesus into tricks like Nancy talked about last week. He says, "Teacher, what's the greatest law?" And this Pharisee knew that Jesus could not possibly pick just one law out of all the so many laws that they were understanding in that time. He was trying to trick Jesus. But Jesus knew what this man was trying to do. And so he looked at the man and he smiled. And Jesus said, "Love God with all your heart and all your mind." And then he said, "This is the greatest commandment of all." But then he said there's another really important one too that goes along with the first one. He said, "Love your neighbor as yourself. If you obey these two laws, then you obey all of the laws." So Jesus, when he answered this question, was saying that loving God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your being is the most important law. And then the second most important law is to love your neighbor as yourself. And he says if you do those two things, then you're going to obey all the laws and follow all of Jesus' teachings. It seems simple, right? Love God, love your neighbor. Check. We can do that. But we know it's not that simple. We know it's sometimes hard to love our siblings because they make us mad or they do things that upset us. And Jesus is saying, well, love your neighbor as yourself, and how you want to be treated when you're mad at or you're not following directions or not following the laws. How would you want to be treated? And today, in 2020, there's two really important things that are happening that help us to love God and to love your neighbor. Now, the first is a pretty simple one to do too. It's this. It's wearing a mask, like so, which can be cumbersome because now you can't see half my face, but it's also about loving your neighbor because wearing the mask, yes, protects you from other people, but it also protects other people from you. So by wearing this mask, you're loving your neighbor as yourself because you're doing what you want other people to do for you. But you're also loving God because you're loving your neighbor. You're doing so many things just by wearing this mask. And we know that some of us have gone back to school in person. And that's hard because we have all these new rules and these new laws. But following them can be as easy as wearing this mask. And by doing that, you're loving your neighbor and loving God. So simple enough. But I understand how that can be hard because when I take this mask off when I'm not around anyone, it's a lot easier to see what I'm saying or hear what I'm saying or to feel it from my facial expressions and to see my mouth moving. So there's another way that we can do that doesn't necessarily require wearing a mask and can be done in your homes. And y'all may be not old enough to do it yet, and I'm old enough to do this yet, but it's also just as important as loving God and loving your neighbor because it's doing those two things. Now, you probably can't see it in this video, but I have a necklace on. So I have my cross that I always wear, but I have this new necklace that I've been wearing this coming season. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's 4 letters on them. And on this necklace, it says VOTE. and that spells vote. And we've been hearing in the news, we've been seeing the campaign posters all around town that's talking about this coming election in less than almost a week and a half. And it seems a little daunting by what we're hearing and all these different people that are running and all these different debates we've been hearing and all these things that kind of seem like fighting. But voting's important because voting helps show your voice. And some of y'all can't vote yet, but you'll be able to vote in the future. And it's about in who you're voting for, that it's loving your neighbor as yourself and loving God. So we're talking about voting for people that you know love their neighbors, that love you, and that are loving God through those actions. And so by voting, it's that you know who those people are. You know what they are capable of doing, and that you think that your voice will be heard. And that's the important part, because by voting, you're doing the work of God because you're showing your voice and representing your voice, which is a voice of God. And by remembering that in your voting choices, that you're loving your neighbor as yourself and you're loving God, then you're doing that work. It's super easy. It can be a little complicated now with COVID because we got in-person ballots, we got voting at the polls. You can vote early, you can vote absentee. There's so many different options. And it can be a little bit confusing, but it's a good way to learn how to love your neighbor by following the rules, which seems a little weird and maybe not what we're used to, but it's a new and cool way to do the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment of all that Jesus says, if you obey these 2 laws, then you're going to obey all the laws. So think about that when you wear this mask, or when you hear about people voting, or when your parents are voting, your grandparents are voting, your neighbors or your friends. Think about that in this next coming week. How can you love your neighbor as yourself? And how can you love God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind through your mask and through your vote? I'm excited to hear how you're going to love God and love your neighbor this week. So comment below or share this with your friends and tell us how you're loving God and how you're loving your neighbor. The greatest commandment of all. Alrighty. See you next week.